I kept going. Day after day back into the grind, pretending nothing had changed. But something had, and it was eating at me from the inside out. The life I knew was shattered. My son Tom, the one I'd raised, trusted he'd taken everything. $2,300,000 gone. I couldn't even look at him the same way anymore. It wasn't just the money. It was the betrayal, the cold, calculated way he'd taken what didn't belong to him. And Emily, his wife, stood by him. No hesitation. No second thoughts. They had done it all legally wrapped in a neat little package of paperwork, signed and sealed, as if it were nothing more than another business deal. That's when I realized they didn't even see me as family anymore. At work, people started talking. Not to me directly, but I could hear it in the whispers, see it in the sidelong glances. My colleagues were curious about what had happened to the once confident, in control Michael. They'd seen me as someone who could handle anything until now. I was becoming a joke, a cautionary tale of a man too weak to stand up for himself. Sarah Wells called me that evening. "Michael, this can't go on. You're letting them walk all over you. You've got to make a move. Now." I wasn't sure if I was ready to hear that. But deep down, I knew she was right. The silence I was keeping wasn't just for the sake of peace anymore. It was slowly killing me. I'd spent my whole life making sure others were taken care of. But now Tom and Emily had crossed a line. They weren't just taking my money, they were taking my dignity. The pressure was mounting and I could feel it. More and more people were choosing sides. Tom and Emily weren't just taking what was mine. They were shaping the narrative. They were painting me as a fool, a man out of touch with reality, someone who couldn't even manage his own affairs. It was subtle the way they did it. Little comments here and there framing the story just enough so the world started to see me the way they did. I felt the walls closing in. My name was being dragged through the mud, and all I could do was watch it happen. Every word that came out of Tom's mouth was another dagger to the heart. The phone call ended with the click of the receiver. Another day, another routine. But it felt different. Every click of the keyboard in my office seemed to echo louder than usual. Every person who passed by my desk felt like a reminder of how things had changed, how everything had changed. The world didn't stop for me. It never does. The same mundane tasks, the same faces, the same coffee machine down the hall. But nothing felt the same anymore. The house was quieter. The air thicker, heavier. My mind kept drifting back to what Tom and Emily had done. At work, I could feel it, the subtle shift in how people interacted with me. It was unspoken, but it was there. My colleagues, once eager to share their days with me, now avoided eye contact. Small talk was a thing of the past. They weren't rude, but their silence said more than words ever could. Some of them used to joke around with me, laugh at bad puns, but now the laughter felt forced when it did come. I couldn't ignore it anymore. The whispers outside the office didn't stop either. Among friends, it wasn't just about me losing the money anymore. It was about how I had handled it. The way they looked at me, the little things they said, all pointed to the same thing. They thought I was weak. And not just weak, but naive. Tom and Emily weren't just thieves. They were master manipulators. Somehow they'd managed to turn me into a cautionary tale, a man who had lost control. That's how the story was being told anyway. It wasn't just the outside world I had to worry about. It was the fact that I was starting to believe them. Maybe I was too passive. Maybe I had been too trusting, too willing to sacrifice everything for the sake of peace. "Michael." Sarah's voice crackled through the phone, as familiar as the scent of coffee in the morning. "You've been quiet for too long. Don't let them think you're a doormat. You've got to stand up for yourself before it's too late. Otherwise, it'll never end." Her words hit harder than I expected. It was one thing to hear them from a friend. It was another to realize how true they were. How long had I been letting this slide? How long had I allowed them to pull me into a corner? I didn't answer her right away. The silence felt like a burden. She was right, I knew. But the truth was, I didn't know where to start. How do you fight back when the enemy is your own flesh and blood? As the days passed, Tom and Emily continued their campaign. They were clever, too. Subtle. They didn't need to attack directly. They'd just plant little seeds, whispers in the ears of those who still spoke to me. "Did you hear what happened with Michael?" they'd say. "He's not the man he used to be." It was almost as if they had a script. They had rewritten the story, and now everyone else was reading it. People who once admired me now questioned my judgment, my character. Even my closest friends seemed to be losing faith. "Are you sure you're okay?" my old friend Mark asked one afternoon, his voice laden with concern. But there was something else there too, something that stung. It was as if he was no longer sure I was the man he thought I was, the man I thought I was. It was as if they had done more than take the money. They had taken my reputation, my standing, and now I was left wondering if I could ever get it back. I wasn't alone in feeling this. Tom and Emily had created a narrative, and now they were working hard to sell it. They wanted everyone to see me the way they did, weak, foolish, easy to manipulate. And for the first time in my life, I was starting to wonder if that's what I had become. It was one thing to take my savings, but this was different. They were taking my dignity, my identity, and I wasn't sure how much more I could lose before I was nothing but a shell of the man I used to be. The hardest part was the guilt. The nagging voice in the back of my mind telling me that I had failed, that I had let it get this far. Sarah's words kept repeating in my head. "You've got to stand up for yourself." But how do you confront someone who knows exactly how to push your buttons? Someone whose family? How do you go to war with the people you love without losing yourself in the process? I didn't know. And I wasn't sure I ever would. As time went on, I began to notice things. Small things. The way Tom avoided my calls, the way Emily would quickly change the subject when I asked questions, the way they'd subtly manipulate the conversation to suit their needs. They were hiding something. I could feel it. And yet, even as I felt the walls close in around me, there was a part of me that didn't want to believe it. I didn't want to believe that my own flesh and blood could do this to me. I didn't want to admit that they had planned this, that they had taken everything without a second thought. A tip-off came out of nowhere. It wasn't much, just a few vague details that didn't sit right, but enough to make my mind spin. The source was anonymous, just a voice on the other end of an untraceable phone line. "Check the accounts," the voice urged. "There's more to it than you know." I didn't know what to believe. It could have been a prank, some cruel joke at my expense. But the more I thought about it, the more things started to add up. Small, irregular transactions began to surface, numbers that didn't make sense, figures that didn't align. At first, I chalked it up to nothing more than a mistake. After all, I had been busy, distracted. But soon I realized this wasn't random. Tom and Emily were too careful. They knew exactly what they were doing. There had to be more to it, more than just the money they had taken from me. A pattern, a plan, a strategy hidden under layers of legalese and deceit. A question gnawed at me relentlessly. Did Tom really think he could get away with this? Or was this just a small part of something much bigger? I could feel myself slipping into uncertainty. How long had I been blind to all of this? For years I had trusted my son, my only son, without question. I had sacrificed everything for him, for us, but now I didn't know who to trust. Was I being paranoid, or was I finally seeing the truth? Every time I thought about confronting him, the walls of doubt seemed to get higher. The guilt, the fear, did I somehow make him this way? Had I failed to set the boundaries he needed? And if I had, did that make me just as complicit in all of this as he was? But the truth kept poking at me like a splinter under my skin. Tom and Emily had done something. They had crossed a line. and I couldn't pretend it wasn't there anymore. They were controlling the narrative, not just the financials. They were shaping what people saw. The whispers had started again, only this time they were louder. People in the community, people I'd known for years, were starting to question me. Were starting to wonder how I could let my own flesh and blood walk all over me. Every conversation was tainted with judgment. Then one evening, Sarah came over. "Michael, you can't keep doing this. You're letting them win. You're letting them take everything from you, your money, your reputation, your pride. It's not just about the money anymore, is it?" Her voice was firm, but I could hear the worry in it. She was right. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about respect. And I was losing mine bit by bit. "I don't know what to do, Sarah," I said. "I can't just confront him. He's my son." Sarah leaned forward, her eyes steady on mine. "Michael, I've known you for too long to see you fall for this. You have to make a choice. If you don't stand up now, you'll never be able to again. And it won't just be Tom and Emily you'll have to answer to, it'll be everyone else who's watching too." She was right. I knew it deep down. I couldn't stay silent forever. It was eating me alive. Tom and Emily had thought I wouldn't fight back. They thought I was too passive to do anything about it. But they didn't know me like they thought they did. So I began to gather evidence. It wasn't much at first. Small details, a phone call here, a transaction there. But it was a start. I needed to know what was going on, needed to be sure, before I confronted them. It wasn't just about confronting them for the sake of it. This had to be strategic. It had to be precise. I started taking notes, jotting down dates, times, anything that didn't sit right. I recorded conversations with Emily when she thought I wasn't paying attention. I knew I had to be careful. I couldn't let them know I was onto them. A few days later, I caught Emily in a slip-up. She mentioned something offhand about an investment I knew nothing about. It was the kind of thing people don't think twice about saying, but to me it was a red flag. I didn't ask her directly. I didn't want to tip her off. But I started to see how much they were controlling, how much they were hiding from me. Every time I pushed a little, I saw them getting nervous. Their calm facade would slip for just a second, revealing the cracks. They were starting to feel the pressure, and I had to keep pushing. But it wasn't easy. I'd learned the hard way that Tom and Emily weren't just family, they were dangerous. They could twist words, manipulate situations, and use my own love against me. And every move I made, every word I spoke had to be calculated. They were already on alert, and they would do everything to stop me from finding the truth. I knew I was getting closer, though. It was in the way they looked at me when they thought I wasn't paying attention. The way Emily's smile would falter just a fraction when she thought I was getting too close. It wasn't a surprise when Tom and Emily made their move. I knew they'd start pushing harder soon enough, but when it came, it hit harder than I expected. Tom sat across from me, a smirk barely hiding behind his serious face. Emily was standing by the door, her arms crossed, watching me like a hawk. There was no hiding it now. "Dad," Tom began, his voice calm, almost too calm. "We need you to sign these agreements. It's just standard paperwork for the next phase of the business. Nothing complicated. The paperwork was spread out before me, pages of legalese and terms I hadn't seen before. None of it made sense. I'd been dealing with business contracts for years, but these were different. There were clauses that made no sense and ones I didn't understand. "Tom, I need some time to review these," I said, keeping my tone steady. "I want to make sure I'm clear on all of this before signing anything." Emily stepped forward, her eyes narrowing. "You don't need time. This is urgent. It needs to be done now. We're in a tight spot and we need you to act quickly." Her words were sharp, the pressure in her voice unmistakable. She was trying to force my hand to make me feel like there was no other choice. "I'm not signing anything right now," I said, my voice firm but controlled. "I've spent years building this. I need to be sure everything is in order. Tom shot me a look, one of those looks that felt like a challenge, like he knew something I didn't. You're not in a position to make demands, Dad. We're all in this together. You have to trust us. The words hit me like a slap. I'd spent so much of my life trusting him. Now the very trust I'd built was being used to manipulate me. I will read through everything, I said again, standing up. I needed to put distance between myself and that table, that paperwork, and most importantly, those two. Fine, Tom replied. But don't take too long. This could really hurt us if we don't act fast. As they walked out, the door closed behind them with a finality I couldn't shake. They were trying to corner me, trying to make me feel like I had no options. But I wasn't going to fall for it. Not yet. I spent the next few days poring over the documents they had left. Each clause, each sentence seemed to be written with the intention of trapping me. There were too many holes, too many clauses that didn't sit right. I started marking them, crossing out parts, writing down questions. But the more I looked, the more I saw how much control they were taking from me. They were trying to seize everything, my assets, my power, my dignity. The more I dug into their finances, the more I realized they had been manipulating the numbers for a while. Some of these deals went back months, even years. They'd planned this for a long time, and they'd been using their positions to keep me in the dark. It wasn't just the money anymore, it was everything. They were stripping away my autonomy, my ability to make decisions. The truth was staring me in the face, and it wasn't something I could ignore. But Tom and Emily weren't done. The next blow came quickly. Without warning, they started pushing harder, using every connection they had to isolate me further. They started cutting ties with people who used to be in my corner, all while subtly implying that I was the one responsible for the problems we were facing. At work, I began to notice things. Colleagues who had always been supportive suddenly pulled away. The invitations to lunch stopped coming, and the friendly phone calls became fewer. I'd hear snippets of conversations as I passed by, whispers about me and my unfortunate situation. Tom and Emily's influence was spreading. One afternoon, I received an email from my longtime friend and business partner, Mark. It was brief, polite, but the message was clear he couldn't continue working with me. He didn't say why, but I knew. Tom and Emily had worked their magic, turning people against me, painting me as a liability, as someone incapable of keeping things together. I couldn't just stand by anymore. Every part of my life was unraveling, and I was letting it happen. But I couldn't allow it to go on. I had spent too long sacrificing for them, putting their needs above mine, and now they were taking everything, my wealth, my friends, my power, and they were doing it in the most calculated way possible. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about respect, about dignity. They had pushed me to the edge, and I was finally starting to see it. If I didn't act now, I would lose everything I'd worked for, everything I had left. The call came late in the evening, as I was sitting at the kitchen table staring at the pile of papers Tom and Emily had left behind. My mind was already swimming with the details, how much they had manipulated, how deeply they had inserted themselves into my life. I picked up the phone, irritated at the interruption, but the voice on the other end made my blood run cold. Michael Roberts. The voice was low, almost a whisper. Yes, I replied, a sense of unease creeping in. There's something you need to know. Tom and Emily, they're moving faster than you think. They've started transferring assets. From the joint account. You won't find it unless you dig deeper. Before I could respond, the line went dead. My heart thudded in my chest as the implications of the call settled in. Tom and Emily weren't just taking what was rightfully mine, they were making a move to hide it, to keep it from me. I stared at the phone for a long moment, the words echoing in my mind. The pieces began to fit together. All the strange financial transactions I had noticed, all the subtle shifts in their behavior, this was the plan. The theft had never been about the money. It was about control. They were stripping me of my power piece by piece. "Damn it," I muttered, slamming the phone back on the table. This wasn't just a betrayal, it was a full-on attack. A calculated move to take everything. I thought I had seen through their lies before, but now it was clearer than ever. They weren't just taking money. They were taking my dignity, my ability to make decisions for myself. The truth was undeniable now. This wasn't just about finances. It was about power. Tom and Emily had been working together to control everything, to bend me to their will. They were trying to erase me from the picture. I couldn't stay passive anymore. My mind raced, but there was no clear path ahead. What could I do? I wasn't a young man anymore, and I wasn't naive either. I knew the game they were playing, and I knew that playing by the old rules would only lead me further down this road of submission. The phone call had shattered any last illusion I had about my son. I had been blind to it for too long, but now the curtain had been pulled back. The relationship we'd built over the years, the trust I had placed in him, all of it had been a lie. He had used me, and I had allowed it. He and Emily had been plotting behind my back, and I had been too wrapped up in their manipulations to see it. I needed help. The next day I met with Sarah. She could see the storm brewing in my eyes as soon as I walked into the coffee shop. "Michael," she said softly, her voice tinged with concern. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "I've been a ghost, Sarah," I replied bitterly, sitting down. "I've been letting them pull the strings. Tom and Emily. They've been taking everything. They've been planning it for months. I've been too blind to see it." Sarah leaned forward, her face serious. "You have to act now. If you don't, you'll lose everything. You're not just fighting for money, you're fighting for your dignity, your life. You can't keep letting them control you." Her words hit harder than I thought they would. I hadn't realized how much I had allowed them to take until she said it out loud. It wasn't just the money. It was everything: my identity, my authority, my sense of self. I had been complicit. I had let them convince me that they knew what was best, that I could trust them. But now I knew better. They had been using me all along. "I don't know if I can win this," I said, the weight of the situation pressing down on me. "Tom's already turning people against me. They've already planted the seeds. They've manipulated the narrative." "Sure," Sarah replied, her eyes never leaving mine. "But that's the thing about manipulation, it falls apart, eventually. You just have to expose it for what it is. People can only believe the lie for so long before the truth starts to come through. The problem was that I didn't know how to expose it yet. I didn't know what they had hidden, what they were covering up. But I knew that this wasn't just about exposing them. It was about taking back what was mine. I couldn't keep letting them control me, manipulate me, make me feel small. "Start with the facts," Sarah continued. "The truth will always outshine the lies. But you need to be ready to fight. You need to stand up for yourself before they finish what they've started." The first step was always the hardest. The more I dug, the deeper the web of lies seemed to grow. I sat in my study surrounded by papers, contracts, bank statements, emails. Tom and Emily had been careful, but not careful enough. They thought they could get away with it, but I knew better now. Every shred of evidence I uncovered added weight to the decision I had been avoiding for so long. I couldn't stay passive anymore. I had to prepare. Sarah had been instrumental in helping me navigate the murky waters. She brought in experts, financial analysts, legal advisors. With their help, I began combing through the financial documents that had once been so familiar. There were discrepancies, hidden transfers, forged signatures, and contracts that didn't hold up under scrutiny. Tom and Emily had moved assets, made deals, all without my consent. "Look at this. Sarah pointed to a line on one of the documents, her voice calm but urgent. "This transaction was made under your name, but you never authorized it. They've been transferring assets in and out of your account for months." The anger that had been simmering under the surface began to bubble up. "How could they do this?" I asked, more to myself than to Sarah. She looked at me with a knowing expression. "They've been doing this for a while, using your trust against you. You can't let them get away with it, Michael." She was right. The more I uncovered, the more I realized how deep their deception ran. This wasn't just about the money. This was about control. They had been systematically taking over everything that was mine, my wealth, my decisions, my autonomy. But the more I uncovered, the more I needed help. Sarah reached out to a lawyer she knew from her past work, someone with experience in financial fraud. His name was Jack Donovan, and he had the kind of no-nonsense attitude that I desperately needed. We met in a small cafe away from prying eyes. "Michael," he said, after reviewing the documents Sarah had gathered, "what they've done here goes beyond just bad business. This is fraud. You're being targeted, and it's not just financial. They're trying to break you down mentally, emotionally, and they're good at it." Jack's words struck me like a jolt of cold water. The anger I felt was now joined by a sense of betrayal that ran deeper than I thought. I never saw it coming. "How did I let it get this far?" Jack paused, leaning forward, his eyes sharp. "It's not about seeing it coming. They've been playing the long game, and now it's time to play yours. We'll need more than just evidence. You'll need strategy." The word strategy lingered in the air between us. It felt like a turning point, like the moment I stopped being passive and started fighting back. But there was a lot of work ahead. I couldn't afford to make any mistakes. We spent the next few days assembling everything, gathering more evidence, analyzing contracts, tracking every move Tom and Emily had made. Sarah helped, offering her insight, making sure I didn't miss any detail. Jack worked on the legal side, putting together a plan that would allow me to take control back. But as the days passed, something darker started to unfold. I started getting strange messages, cryptic texts, emails that were meant to rattle me. One of them read, "You don't know what you're up against. Step too far, and you'll regret it." At first, I brushed it off. A threat, a scare tactic. But then the phone calls started. Silent calls that I could never trace. The feeling of being watched began to settle deep in my bones. It was the kind of feeling you get when you know you're being followed, but you can't see who's doing it. I could no longer ignore the reality that this wasn't just about money or business. This had turned personal. Sarah noticed the change in me. "They're trying to intimidate you," she said one evening after we'd been going over the documents. "It's their last play. They think if they scare you enough, you'll back down." The message came through late one night, unexpected and urgent. A reliable source, someone I trusted, told me that Tom and Emily were pushing ahead with their plan to exclude me from a major project I had been working on for years. This project wasn't just a business venture. It was a cornerstone of my reputation. Losing it would be more than just financial. It would undermine everything I had worked for. I sat still for a long time after reading that message, the weight of it pressing down on my chest. I had known they were capable of anything but this. To target my career, my livelihood. This was beyond the realm of betrayal. They were aiming for more than just control over my finances now. They wanted to erase me completely. The next morning, I found myself in a high-stakes meeting sitting across from Tom and Emily. Their smug expressions were almost too much to bear. The discussion was about the project, but their words cut deeper than any formal proposal. They were pushing for decisions that directly impacted my involvement, sidelining me at every turn. They spoke with an air of authority, as though they had already won. "We've discussed this," Michael Tom said, his voice smooth and condescending. It's in the best interest of the company that we move forward without you. Your judgment has become questionable." Emily nodded, a cold smile on her lips. "We've already spoken to the board, and they agree. It's time for you to step aside." My heart raced, but I didn't let it show. I kept my face neutral, my hands clasped tightly in front of me. It was the only thing that kept me from lashing out. "Is that so?" I finally said, my voice calm, almost too calm. "You're willing to risk everything I've worked for, my reputation. You think the board will just follow your lead without hearing the full story?" Tom leaned back in his chair, the same smug expression plastered on his face. "They don't need to hear your side, Michael. You've already made your decision by your actions. We're just following through on what's best for everyone." The words stung, but I wasn't about to give them the satisfaction of seeing how much it hurt. I knew what they were doing. They were trying to isolate me, make me feel small in front of everyone. But they hadn't won yet. "I'm not going to walk away from this quietly," I said, standing up. "You may have some influence over the board, but this isn't over. Not by a long shot." I left the meeting without another word, but the damage had already been done. The moment I stepped out of that room, I could feel the shift. The whispers had started again. Tom and Emily were working overtime, using their connections to spread their version of events. My colleagues and business partners began to distance themselves. Some were careful, others not so much. I overheard snippets of conversations, questions about my ability to lead, to make decisions. They were eroding my credibility piece by piece. The fear, the anger it built up in me, threatening to overtake my resolve. But instead of crumbling, something changed in me. I couldn't afford to be the man I once was, the one who let things slide, the one who allowed himself to be walked over. Tom and Emily thought they had pushed me to the edge, but they didn't realize just how much fight was left in me. I began to formulate a plan. I didn't need to just counter them at work. I needed to dismantle their entire strategy. With Sarah's help and the legal support from Jack, we started putting the pieces together. Every fraudulent transaction, every forged signature, it all started to fit into a clearer picture. But the more I uncovered, the more I realized just how far Tom and Emily were willing to go to win. The following days were a blur of strategy and preparation. I documented everything, every conversation, every email, every shady deal they had made. It wasn't just about gathering evidence anymore. It was about timing. If I acted too soon, I risked giving them the upper hand. If I waited too long, I might lose everything. Then the threats started. First, it was the cryptic messages. "You won't get away with this. You're not going to like what's coming." I didn't flinch, but the danger was real. The more I pushed back, the more they came after me, not just through business, but through my personal life as well. My privacy was invaded, and I started to see shadowy figures where they shouldn't have been. Someone was watching me, tracking my every move. But fear didn't paralyze me. It fueled my resolve. Every threat they made, every attempt to intimidate me, only strengthened my determination. They had underestimated me. They thought they could break me by controlling my finances, my career, my reputation. But they didn't understand that I wasn't just fighting for money anymore. I was fighting for my life, for my dignity, for the man I had once been. I knew the next step. I wasn't going to sit idly by while they pulled the strings. I had a team, I had the evidence, and most importantly, I had a plan. It was time to expose them. The aftermath of it all felt surreal. The courtroom was silent after the verdict, the weight of years of deceit hanging in the air. Tom sat across from me, his face pale, as the truth of his actions finally began to sink in. Emily beside him avoided my gaze. They were no longer the people I had once trusted. They were criminals, plain and simple. The case was airtight. With the evidence I had meticulously gathered, Sarah's research, Jack's expertise, and the documents I had painstakingly collected, their web of lies unraveled before them. The fraud, the manipulation. It was all out in the open. Tom's financial misconduct was now under investigation by the authorities, and Emily was facing the consequences of her actions. She had managed to manipulate so many people, but not this time. There was no satisfaction in seeing them suffer. In fact, it felt strangely hollow. I had spent so long, so many years tied up in their lies, that I realized it wasn't their downfall that would bring me peace. It was my own recovery. For the first time in years, I understood what it meant to stand on my own 2 feet, to hold my ground, without compromising who I was. I looked at Tom, his face now flushed with shame. "You thought you could take everything, didn't you?" I said, my voice steady. He opened his mouth to speak, but closed it quickly. There were no excuses left. The damage was done. Emily, on the other hand, stood with her arms crossed, her eyes darting between Tom and me, as though searching for some kind of ally. There was nothing left to say to her either. The woman I once thought I could trust was nothing more than a skilled manipulator, using me and my love for her husband to get what she wanted. The legal fallout was swift and unforgiving. Tom was under investigation for financial crimes, and Emily's reputation crumbled as she was publicly denounced by those who had once considered her a trusted business partner. The very people who had once praised them now saw them for what they were: opportunists who would stop at nothing to get what they wanted. Their fall from grace was just the beginning of the consequences they would face. Despite the relief I felt, there was a part of me that mourned. Not for them, but for the years lost. The father I had been, the man I had trusted, all of that had been buried in the rubble of betrayal. I had sacrificed so much for a family that was never truly mine to begin with. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about the years of self-deception, of being blind to the reality of who they had become. But I couldn't afford to stay in that place of loss. The truth was, I wasn't the same man who had been manipulated. I had changed. I had been forced to face the most painful truths about my own weakness. But in that painful self-awareness, I had found strength. The man I was now wasn't broken by their betrayal. He was built by it. I would never be that man again, the man who let his love for his family be used against him. Sarah reached out to me a few days later, offering words of congratulations. "You did what had to be done," she said. "You took back control." Her words stuck with me. I had taken control. It wasn't just about taking back what was mine. It was about reclaiming my life from the people who had taken it from me. I couldn't go back to who I was, and I didn't want to. The fight had changed me in ways I wasn't entirely ready to understand, but I knew it was for the better. After the legal proceedings were over, I was left to pick up the pieces. But this time I wasn't alone. I had my dignity. I had my independence. And slowly the remnants of my old life began to take shape into something new. I didn't want to just return to the life I had before. That life was tainted. I had to move forward. I threw myself into my work with a renewed sense of purpose. I focused on the projects that mattered to me, ones that made me feel alive, made me feel like I was truly contributing to something greater than myself. The emptiness that had once hung over me was gone. The weight of the years of silent suffering, of wondering if I could have done more, if I had been a better father, a better husband, those doubts were replaced with clarity. I had done everything I could. They had been the ones to betray me. One evening, as I sat alone in my office reviewing new business proposals, I realized something. I wasn't just building my career back up. I was building myself back up. Every decision I made, every step I took was mine to control. I decided to take on a new project, one that would allow me to give back to help others who had been in situations like mine, trapped by people who preyed on their kindness. I would start a foundation, not just for financial aid, but for emotional support as well. People needed help finding their way back from betrayal, just as I had. The phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was Sarah again. "I've been hearing about your new venture," she said with a smile in her voice. "You're not just surviving, Michael. You're thriving." I leaned back in my chair, feeling a sense of peace I hadn't thought possible. "I guess I am," I said, smiling to myself. I had faced my demons, stared down the people who had torn my world apart, and I had emerged stronger. Tom and Emily had lost everything they had fought for, but I had gained something they would never have: my freedom, my peace, and my respect. And for the first time in a long time, I was living life on my own terms.